She wasn't just a star, she was a scandal. A name whispered behind VHS counters. Traci Lords didn't just enter the screen, she disrupted it. Her name passed from tape to tape like a secret. Her image burned into the analog glow of VHS culture. By the time the world realized her early rise came under controversial circumstances, she had already become a defining figure of the X-rated era. What followed was a media firestorm. Her past work was pulled from shelves, and conversations about her were suddenly whispered in legal terms rather than pop ones. But for Traci, it wasn't the end of her story. It was the start of a second act. She didn't disappear. She pivoted. By the late 80s, she was showing up in cult horror, sci-fi, and midnight movies. Roles that leaned into her public image but allowed her to flip the script. Not of this earth, shock 'em dead, crybaby. Films that knew exactly who she was and let her own it. Her acting was campy, tongue-in-cheek, stylish, and slowly, the narrative around her began to shift. She was no longer a controversy. She was a survivor, a symbol of reinvention, someone who turned notoriety into authorship. In the 2000s, she was behind the camera, writing, directing, appearing at indie festivals, fully in control of her legacy. Traci Lords didn't erase her past. She reframed it, and in doing so, stepped out of the shadows and into something far more lasting, a kind of fame you build yourself, frame by frame. Before the scandal, there was the smile. Marilyn Chambers was the face of innocence, and quite literally. Her image, glowing and wholesome, was featured on boxes of Ivory Snow detergent, cradling a newborn baby. She was the picture of purity, the corporate ideal of maternal softness. And then, seemingly overnight, she became something else entirely. Her breakout film in the adult circuit was shocking not just because of what it was, but because of who it was. The same young woman from the laundry aisle was now front and center in one of the most notorious X-rated films of the 1970s. The contrast was too much for middle America to process, and that's exactly what made her infamous. But Marilyn Chambers didn't vanish into the scandal. Instead, she moved laterally, navigating a strange space where exploitation met art, and taboo became narrative fuel. She entered the realm of cult cinema, and it was there, in the flickering light of midnight theaters, that she began to rewrite her legacy. Her most notable turn came in Rabid, a Canadian horror film directed by a then-rising David Cronenberg. She played a woman infected by a medical experiment gone wrong, growing a thirst not for sex, but for blood. The role was grotesque, tragic, and haunting, and through it, Chambers proved she was more than the controversy she'd been tied to. She could act. She could hold the screen with quiet intensity and a kind of raw vulnerability that went far beyond her origins. In Rabid, she wasn't a fantasy, she was a nightmare, a metaphor, a warning, and perhaps in some way a reflection of how the industry consumes women and leaves them altered. Marilyn never escaped her past, nor did she seem to want to. She embraced it, spoke about it, owned it. And through that brutal honesty, she found a second audience. Cinephiles, horror lovers, feminist critics, all began to re-examine her work, not through the lens of shame, but of cultural subversion. She lived many lives within one name: model, adult film star, horror lead, cult icon, a symbol of both America's obsession with purity and its inevitable rejection of it. Marilyn Chambers didn't fall from grace. She jumped, headfirst, into the underground, and came out the other side not clean but transformed. Sasha Gray never asked for forgiveness. She didn't walk into the adult film industry with shame or even hesitation. She arrived with intention and a challenge. To destroy the wall between high art and low desire, between performance and provocation. She knew exactly what she was doing, and that unsettled everyone. While others in the X-rated world distanced themselves from the labels, Sasha leaned into them. She read philosophy on set, quoted Bataille and Sontag in interviews. She rejected the sanitized narratives of victimhood or reinvention. Instead, she demanded to be seen as a thinking woman who made a radical choice in a culture that punishes that kind of clarity. Her crossover wasn't quiet, it was cinematic. In 2009, she starred in The Girlfriend Experience, directed by Steven Soderbergh, a filmmaker known for building bridges between indie cinema and Hollywood convention. Sasha played a high-end escort, but this wasn't fantasy. It was clinical, minimalist, disarming. The camera didn't ogle her. It watched her, as she drifted through sterile apartments and conversations about money, connection, and the illusion of control. She was haunting, detached, real. And suddenly, people who had never spoken her name were now writing essays about her. But Sasha Gray didn't stop there. She became a DJ, a writer, an actress in international art films and experimental projects. She was invited to panel discussions, lectures, book fairs. Not despite her past, but because of the way she had framed it. To some, she was a contradiction: X-rated background, literary taste, erotic history, intellectual edge. But to Sasha, there was no contradiction, just the refusal to be simplified. She didn't just cross from adult cinema to mainstream, she blurred the border until it disappeared. And what emerged was something rare in any era of Hollywood: a woman who told her story before anyone else could rewrite it for her. Sasha Gray never looked back. She only looked through the lens, through the stigma, through the expectations of what a woman, a performer, an icon is supposed to be. Long before the internet changed everything, there was Ginger Lynn, queen of the VHS boom, legend of the video store backroom, and perhaps the last star to truly define an era before it vanished into pixels. In the 1980s, she was everywhere, or at least everywhere most people pretended not to look. Her name was whispered with a mix of awe and taboo, printed in bold fonts on cassette covers that flickered under fluorescent lights in the adult section of local video shops. But Ginger Lynn wasn't just a face. She was a personality, loud, brash, and completely unapologetic. She rode the wave of the X-rated industry's peak with the energy of someone who wasn't just playing a role, but claiming space. While others softened their image, she leaned into it, teasing, laughing, pushing limits not just in scenes, but in interviews, in appearances, in every frame she inhabited. And then, like many others, she disappeared. But unlike most, she came back. In the 1990s, Ginger Lynn resurfaced, this time in a different kind of cinema. Low-budget thrillers, horror flicks, exploitation revivals. Directors like Rob Zombie cast her not as a novelty, but as a presence. Someone who brought an edge, a legacy, and a sense of danger to every role. She became a cult figure not because she tried to erase her past, but because she carried it with her like a badge of authenticity. In an industry obsessed with reinvention, she remained surprisingly constant, raw, funny, human. There was a moment, fleeting but real, when the lines blurred. She starred alongside Traci Lords in indie films, brushed up against the edge of mainstream again, and appeared at conventions as both a nostalgia act and a subversive icon. To her fans, she was never just an adult star. She was the face of a lost format, a symbol of a wilder, weirder Hollywood that lived between tapes at midnight, with tracking lines and no apologies. Ginger Lynn didn't break into the mainstream. She dragged a piece of the underground with her and left it there, smirking, daring anyone to pretend they hadn't watched. For a generation, Maitland Ward was the sweet redhead next door. Millions grew up watching her on Boy Meets World, where she played Rachel, the cheerful, slightly clumsy college roommate who brought a spark of flirtation to the world of sitcom innocence. She smiled, she joked, she fit the mold. But off-screen, something didn't sit right. Hollywood had placed her in a box, and she was already looking for the key. For years after the show ended, she tried to fit into the system, auditioning for roles that always felt too small, too safe. The more she tried to conform, the more invisible she became, until one day, she stopped conforming altogether. In her 40s, an age when most actresses are quietly nudged off-screen, Maitland Ward did something almost no one expected. She entered the world of adult cinema. But this wasn't a fall from grace. It was a strategic reinvention. Ward approached the adult industry not as an act of desperation, but as a platform for expression, on her terms. She spoke openly about the decision. She wasn't ashamed, she was liberated. She brought the discipline of mainstream Hollywood into the adult world and quickly became one of its most visible and talked about figures. But unlike many before her, she refused to disappear into the stereotype. She leaned into high production values, long-form storytelling, and character-driven narratives, pushing for something that resembled cinematic respect in a space that had long been denied it. The media didn't know what to make of her. A former Disney actress, now one of the biggest stars in the X-rated space, she didn't hide. She gave interviews, wrote essays, spoke about agency, control, and reclaiming narrative power. To some, she became a controversy. To others, a feminist symbol. But to Maitland herself, it was simple. This was the first time she was playing a role she actually chose. She crossed into the world of taboo, not as an exile, but as a creator. And in doing so, she revealed just how thin and how performative the line really is between mainstream and underground. In a town that often discards women after 30, Maitland Ward broke the script, rewrote the rules, and reminded everyone watching that sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is refuse to fade out quietly. Jenna Jameson didn't just cross over, she became the crossover. At a time when adult performers were still relegated to the margins, Jenna walked straight into the spotlight and turned her name into an empire. She wasn't content with being a star, she wanted to be a phenomenon. And for a moment, she was. In the mid to late 1990s, her presence was everywhere. Magazine covers, late-night interviews, cameos in comedies, Howard Stern, MTV, talk shows. She wasn't hiding from her past. She was monetizing it, owning it, packaging it into something glossy, provocative, and unnervingly marketable. And that's what made her so unique. Jenna wasn't just famous for her work in the X-rated world. She became famous because she made that work into a brand. She was sharp, media savvy, and years ahead of the influencer age. Her memoir, How to Make Love Like a Corn Star, wasn't just a bestseller. It was a cultural event, mixing trauma, confession, and spectacle in a way few dared attempt. She walked through every door the mainstream tried to keep shut. She appeared in private parts, voiced a character in Grand Theft Auto: Vice City, got referenced in sitcoms. She wasn't an outsider looking in. She was already in the room, and everyone knew it. But the climb had a cost. As time passed, Jenna's story grew more complex: business battles, personal struggles, reinventions, and retreats. The line between who she was and who she was expected to be blurred. But even then, she remained a cultural touchstone, the name that represented an entire era, one when adult fame flirted with the mainstream and nearly succeeded in seducing it. To some, she was controversy incarnate. To others, a symbol of self-made power. But to most, she was unforgettable, because she refused to be quiet, refused to be shamed, and refused to be limited. Jenna Jameson didn't ask for a seat at the table. She built her own and put her name on it.